Hello and welcome to Historyful. Today we are going to be learning about the last words of monarchs before they were executed. Today I've chosen 4 monarchs that we are going to be learning about and learning about their execution and the last words that they said, because they are quite poignant, they are quite chilling, and they are just quite remarkable. The royals that I've chosen today are Mary Queen of Scots, Anne Boleyn, Lady Jane Grey and King Charles I. So let's get started with Mary Queen of Scots. Mary Queen of Scots was a remarkable queen, ascending to the throne of Scotland at only 6 days old after the death of her father, King James V. Her lovely uncle, King Henry VIII, did try to oust her and gain control but was unsuccessful. He really was a right piece of work, that man. As a child, she was sent to be raised in France and live in the court of King Henry II. She in turn married Francis, the eldest son of King Henry II. After the death of his father, she ascended to the throne of yet another country. Unfortunately, Mary became widowed at 18 and returned to Scotland to reign as queen. Mary also believed that she was the rightful queen of yet another country, England, which was currently ruled by her cousin Elizabeth I. Believing that King Henry VIII's second marriage to Anne Boleyn, Queen Elizabeth's mother, was illegitimate due to religious reasons, this would have removed Elizabeth from the line of succession and put Mary, Henry's niece, as the rightful heir to the throne. It was this belief that would seal her fate. Despite all these setbacks and pushbacks regarding her reign as queen, she did quite well for the first few years as an active queen on the throne of Scotland. Eventually, though, she was forced to abdicate her throne to her son James. She tried multiple methods to regain control but was not successful. Mary had escaped persecution in her own country by seeking refuge in England, only to be captured and held in prison in various castles for 18 years. A Catholic uprising in support of Mary began to worry Elizabeth. Mary was a threat to her and to her power, and after much back and forth, Queen Elizabeth reluctantly signed the death warrant for her cousin. On February 5, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, walked up the scaffold to her death. It was not to be a quick and efficient execution as one would hope for. As she stood there facing the crowd in preparation for her execution, the executioner offered to help her disrobe. She declined and asked her lady's maids for assistance. Upon removing her black outer gown, they revealed a stunning and vibrant crimson dress. She removed her veil and headdress, placing them on a nearby stool, along with her crucifix and prayer book. She pulled out a delicate gold-trimmed handkerchief. She intended to have one of her ladies tie it as a blindfold, but the lady's maid was trembling so violently she resorted to tying it herself. As the executioner asked for Mary's forgiveness, she granted it, saying, "I forgive you and all the world with my heart, for I hope this death will make an end to all my troubles." As her head lay on the block, she whispered her final words, "Into thy hands, Lord, I commend my spirit," which she spoke in Latin. As the axe fell, it missed and struck the back of her head, and she cried out for the final time, "Sweet Jesus!" And a second blow of the axe severed the head, albeit for a bit of sinew, which he angrily hacked apart with his blade. The executioner then held up the head to the crowd and called out, "God save the Queen." Unfortunately, the hair which he held turned out to be a wig, and the head of Mary, Queen of Scots, unceremoniously fell from his hand and rolled into the horrified onlookers, lips still moving. The once beautiful and vibrant queen was revealed to be old, grey and balding. To add more chaos to the situation, as he lifted her dress to remove her garter, as was the tradition, a little weird and a little creepy but nonetheless tradition, a little dog ran out from under her dress. Her little puppy had been hiding away in her dress this whole time. As he escaped, a minister who had just prior to the execution tried to convert Mary to the Protestant faith grabbed the dog, whose name was Gideon, and forced his face into the pool of blood that was collecting beside the body and tried to make him drink. The dog refused and promptly bit the man's hand. So there we have it, my friends. The final words of Mary, Queen of Scots were, "Sweet Jesus." I hope that the second blow of the axe happened very quickly, because I can't imagine being half decapitated and having to deal with that again. Oh my goodness. Terrifying. Our next royal to head to the scaffolds is Anne Boleyn, who was the second wife of Henry VIII. He had wanted her for a long time, and he pursued her, and finally he managed to marry her after he had his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, annulled. Now, if you don't know about Henry VIII, you need to know about him, because he was a tyrant and he was not a nice person, and I feel sorry for any woman who had to marry him. And 2 of them paid with their lives, 2 of them were executed, but he was just not a nice person. I think maybe he started out being nice, but the further on he got in his reign, he just got crueler and crueler and crueler, and he had a slow and painful death, and I am not sorry about it. But we're going to be learning about Anne Boleyn and her final words today. Anne Boleyn was the queen that Henry had desired for many, many years, but unfortunately she turned out to be not the right type of queen for him. She was too opinionated and too vivacious, too much of everything. She gave birth to a child, a daughter who would eventually become Queen Elizabeth I. However, this was not the son that Henry wanted. He needed to be rid of her also. Queen Anne Boleyn was charged with treason, adultery and incest with her brother, all things that later scholars and historians have proved unlikely at best. She was sentenced to death by burning at the stake, which was the typical punishment for women convicted of treason. Henry, however, ordered her death by beheading. Her execution was rather unique in its orchestration. I will leave a link below in the description so that you can watch that video too, because it really is quite horrendous what he did. As she stood on the scaffold looking out at the crowd, her last words to her people were as follows. Good Christian people, I come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor speak anything of that. Wherefore I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever so good, a gentle and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me, to God I commend my soul. As she knelt upright, which was the French way of performing executions of this manner, she repeated over and over, Jesus, receive my soul, O Lord God, have pity on my soul. Her death was swift, with one strike of the executioner's sword. There is so much that we can learn from Anne Boleyn and her execution. So there we have the story of Anne Boleyn and her execution and her final words. I think it's very interesting that while she was on the scaffold that she did not say anything untoward about Henry, and I think that was very, very deliberate. She could have said whatever she wanted. She was going to die one way or another, but I think her way of addressing the crowd and speaking kindly and generously about Henry VIII showed that she was thinking of her daughter Elizabeth. She did not want anything to come to harm against her daughter because she was still alive. She was only very, very young at this time, and she wanted to try and protect her daughter, I think. And if she had said unkind things, then it would have had an effect on her daughter, and I think she was doing what mothers do in protecting her child. So now we're going to move on to Lady Jane Grey, who is my all-time hero. I love this little girl. I mean, she was only 17 when she was executed, but she absolutely has part of my heart, and I just hope that she is having a wonderful life in the next life, because she had a really, really horrible life here on earth. And yeah, she really her story just breaks your heart and just tugs at the heartstrings. So let's get into her little story. Lady Jane Grey led a fairly miserable and sad life right up to her execution at 17 years old. She was declared queen after the death of young King Edward VI. Prior to his death, Edward made a change to his will that whereupon his death the throne would pass to Lady Jane Grey rather than to his sister Mary. This is thought to ensure that the throne would remain under Protestant rule. Henry's sister Mary was the daughter of Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, whom he had his marriage annulled and caused England to break ties with the Catholic Church in order to marry Anne Boleyn. Catherine was Catholic, as was her daughter Mary, and in no circumstances did they want Mary, the rightful heir, to rule. Once Edward passed, Lady Jane Grey very reluctantly accepted the throne. Her marriage and her rise to the throne had all been a carefully orchestrated plan in which she had no say and was merely a pawn in the game. Lady Jane Grey is known widely as the 9-Day Queen, as after 9 days she willingly handed over the crown to Mary. She was tried for treason and sentenced to death. On February the 12th, 1554, the young 17-year-old queen stood on the scaffolds and addressed the crowd for her very last time. Good people, I come hither to die, and by our law I am condemned the same. The fact indeed against the Queen's Highness was unlawful, and the consenting thereunto by me. But touching the procurement and desire thereof by me, or on my behalf, I do wash my hands thereof in innocency, before God and the face of you, good Christian people, this day. As she struggled to find the block on which to place her head, she cried out to the executioner, "What shall I do? Where is it?" She was quickly helped, and now with her head securely on the block, she spoke her final words, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." In one clean blow of the executioner's axe, her death was sealed. Lady Jane Grey is buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower of London. I have another video about Lady Jane Grey and her whole life and her whole story because I can only fit in a little bit in this video, but ultimately her whole life was just one big pot of sadness and misery, and nobody loved her and nobody wanted her. They just used her as a pawn in their game, so to speak. And her last words where she proclaimed innocency, she really was innocent. She was so innocent. She was only 17 years old when she was put on the throne. She didn't want it. She really didn't want it, and she handed it over willingly. And right at the last minute, she was almost granted clemency. She was almost given a stay of execution where she would have been spared her life. But her brothers and her father decided they were going to revolt against the Queen, and so the Queen executed her. But I don't think her brothers or her father really cared because they didn't show any love to her throughout her whole life. That is the story about Lady Jane Grey. I really encourage you to go and research her a bit more because she is a remarkable woman, and I'm sure just like me, she will have a part of your heart too. Okay, finally we are on to King Charles I. I actually really like King Charles. I don't really like him as a king, but I really like him as a father and a husband. He is well known as a great father, and his children absolutely loved and adored him, and he loved and adored his children as well. I don't think he should have been king. I think he would have been great as just your average old dad, because that seems to be what he found his passion and his love was his family and his children and his wife. But he really didn't have a choice either, and so he became king, and we will learn about his story and how he ended up on the chopping block. King Charles I's reign was rocky to say the least. His distrust of the government was evident as throughout his time as king from 1625 to 1649, he dissolved parliament multiple times and ruled alone. In fact, for a period of 11 years, he ruled without a government, often only reinstating the government when he ran out of money for war. In private, he was said to be a loving husband, caring father, and incredibly shy. However, his public persona was much different. He lacked the ability to see other perspectives and insight into problems. His indifference and perceived arrogance lost him the support and admiration of the public rather quickly. It was his continuous battles with the government that would be his downfall. These disagreements provoked English civil wars. It was after his forces were defeated in the Second War that the army and the government demanded that he be held accountable. King Charles was charged with treason and summoned to stand trial as the grand author of all our troubles. King Charles I, being the king that he was not simply going to acknowledge the power of the government, especially any power that they may have had over him. He refused outright to recognise the legality of the court and entered no plea at trial. On January 27, 1649, he was sentenced to death by beheading. He was given just 3 days to put his affairs into order and say goodbye to his children. His wife and older children had already fled out of the country, but his youngest two children, Elizabeth and Henry, remained with him. In his last days, he refused to see anyone but his little ones. Elizabeth, just 11 years old, recorded her father's last words to her in her diary. As tears poured down her face, he told her, "Sweetheart, you will forget this." Elizabeth cried hysterically when she realized that she would not see her beloved father again. As they were led from the room, Charles ran to embrace and comfort them one last time. He spent the remainder of the day in bed, unable to be consoled. The following morning he dressed with resolution. "I have an important work to do today," he declared. He asked for a second shirt to wear. It was a cold morning and he did not want anyone to think that he shivered out of fear. At 10 a.m. the time had come for him to make his way to his death. He walked through St. James Park, where he had spent many hours playing with his children. He walked through the banqueting house beneath the splendour of a mural that he had previously commissioned of his father looking down from heaven. A huge crowd had gathered to witness this unprecedented event. It was not a popular decision. Finding an executioner willing to kill a king was difficult. He was so well disguised that there was not a chance that anyone would ever know his identity. The guards held back the crowd as Charles stood to deliver his last words. He knew that they would only be audible to the ears of the executioner and the guards nearest him. Charles' last words to his people were simple and poignant. "I go from an incorruptible to an incorruptible crown, where no disturbance can be, no disturbance at all." His death was quick and clean. Charles I remains the only reigning English monarch to be executed for treason. As you can see, I think it was Charles's pride that got in the way of his leadership as king. He was not willing to hear other people or to understand different perspectives, so to speak. He wanted to rule alone. He believed in the divinity of kings. and that you were preordained before this life to be a king, and you were accountable to no one except God. And so he didn't recognize the government or their leadership over him, as is evident by his death. But he was a great dad, and he should have just been a dad, because he would have been amazing at that. He would have had a whole different kind of legacy left behind if he could have just been a dad. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the stories about these English monarchs and their executions and their final words. These are incredible people who have left their mark on history, and you should learn more about them because they are great people. And I will see you again next time in our next video. I am so excited. I have some really good stuff coming up.